Good evening. This is Laura Hughes. Thank you for joining us for this evening's VB LiberTEA podcast. Our show is broadcast every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. and can be viewed on your Facebook page. The host of VB LiberTEA is normally former Virginia Beach City Councilman John Moss. This is Laura Hughes, former Virginia Beach School Board member, sitting in for the vacationing John Moss tonight and for the next 3 weeks. So let's get right to our guest here. Tonight, our guest is Pamela Burnham. She has been a nurse for over 20 years, and in her capacity as a nurse, she's worked in critical care, oncology, cardiac care, and home health. As a military family, she's traveled all over and worked in healthcare more than just in the Tidewater area. She has shifted her focus now more to a holistic approach, functional medicine, and with the shutdowns of 2020, she has gotten very involved in the medical freedom movement. So welcome to Pamela Burnham. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit first about how you got into nursing.
Oh goodness. In the military, it's hard to get grounded in any capacity when you're moving all the time because I've always wanted to be a nurse. I've always cared for people and always been very health conscious myself because we have a family of pretty rough genetics. We've got parents that have been on medication all their lives. My mother's been in pain ever since I can remember. And my goal was to fight every any medications I could by chasing it with diet or, making sure I eat properly, I live healthy lifestyle. I think that's the most important thing. So I was able to, I have a sister who's had a few heart attacks, or a couple by the time she was 38. I'm 60 this year. I have an aunt that died at age 36. And I had grandparents that died in their early 50s. And I knew that was hanging over my head as well. So my focus in my entire life was to study diet and research. And I've been all over the country and taken care of a lot of people. One of the areas I've worked in is the Blue Zones in Loma Linda, California. And interestingly, there I worked in the surgery unit. And I noticed that most of the patients were older and thin. When I say older, I mean 80s, 90s, having surgery and doing well. But I had no idea what their diet's composed of. I didn't realize they had such a high standard of eating. So I personally am a proponent of a whole food plant-based diet, but not everybody can adjust to that kind of lifestyle. But because some people have really good genetics, and they can eat more things than what I can eat, but I can't. I have to be a lot more strict about that. So in 2015, after having worked in the heart center, taking care of ICU patients, you're told going in there that you have maybe one high acuity patient and then one lower acuity patient. Well, you'll find yourself in the hospital taking care of at least two, and then on breaks you're taking care of other nurses' patients that are high acuity, and it was only a matter of time before somebody was going to get injured, sick, or die, and I didn't want to be part of that. So I started my own business in 2015. I also authored a book about reversing disease and get people off of medication, so that was a big part of my focus at that point. And I had been taking care of cancer patients leading into COVID. And when it hit, of course, I wanted to protect my patients. That was my biggest concern, just going around making sure they had everything they needed in place. Did a lot of running for them so they weren't going out and getting exposed. And talking to their health care, I had nursing aides and whatnot, running into the stores and, just making sure they were safe in every way they could. But my alerts went off immediately when they told people to go home until they couldn't breathe. They were telling people what an N95 mask was, and I knew darn well what an N95 mask was, and it wasn't what they were showing us on TV, because I had worked in infectious disease, and I had worn the actual N95 mask, and it was nothing like what they were telling us it was.
So then, during these forced shutdowns in 2020, I'm trying to say it a nice way, forced shutdowns is probably the most charitable way I can phrase it.
Right.
This changed, I guess it didn't change your focus. It actually probably made you more laser focused on what you were doing, trying to lean more toward healthcare instead of sick care,
right,
and get you into medical freedom. So that trajectory changed a little bit because we saw our freedoms being taken away, and there was a medical freedom issue, people demanding that people take a vaccine that hadn't even been approved by the FDA and clearly had not had enough testing. It is my understanding, after some previous conversation with you, that doctors didn't know enough to rise to the level of informed consent for that shot, let alone patients. What can you discuss about that?
Well, I wouldn't say all doctors, because immediately I had some connections being in the military as a military spouse with other spouses, I guess you could say, of other husbands and whatnot that had been involved in intel. So I had an early idea on where to go to find information, encrypted sites and whatnot, because they were censoring everybody.
Right.
And I had contacted some people. We gathered together, created some groups. We had found places where we could find research that was not controlled by the media and big government. So we were communicating and doing our research there. So very early on in 2020, I would say it's very shortly after the lockdowns, I had noticed Dr. Ryan Cole, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Dr. Zelenko. Those were all very prominent voices coming out in the censored world of doctors. And they immediately grasped on what you were saying. There was no informed consent, and that was a big issue. They're telling people this when in fact it's not that. They're not telling anybody. They don't have the inserts in the COVID shots. We all immediately noticed that if you go into a drugstore or whatever and you ask them for the inserts for the drugs, they pull it out and it was blank. And even the pharmacists were shocked. They're like, "Oh my goodness, there's nothing on this." I guess we'll have to call the provider of the medication and find out why the information's not there. But they weren't providing that to the public, and that was definitely a big alarm.
So maybe this is a little bit off the beaten track here, but what are the ethical obligations of a pharmacist or a doctor who is administering and advocating for medication that they can't even give you the insert on? I mean, informed consent is a huge part of medical care.
Absolutely.
I should never have something done to me
Right.
that I'm not given all the facts about, the good, the bad, what could happen, and that did not happen with this.
Right, and sadly, we've all been so desensitized to side effects. You look at all the drugs and you see miles and miles and miles of side effects, even on television. Whenever they show you something for, any kind of disorder, they'll tell you, okay, you have a chance of this, 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 and this. They got so many side effects, and the public is just like, okay, well, I understand there's a risk of all this stuff, but yeah, my government's looking out for me. They wouldn't come and, hurt me with this stuff. But sadly, Big Pharma is not on our side, and not on the side of making us healthy. They're on the side of getting us sick, chronically sick, and keeping us on medications for life so they can make a lot of money. They're one of the biggest, most powerful organizations in the world.
But is there no ethical obligation of a doctor?
There is, absolutely. You've got the Nuremberg Code and the Helsinki Codes, all that were, part of the post-World War II, I guess you could say court hearings or whatever. It came out, and then they, went after the doctors that did not follow those rules, or they created those rules then. And those things are all in place, but people seem to have forgotten about them. So we had actually gotten a team together and followed in Dr. Martin's recommendations, printed out some forms, and we started delivering them, or return receipt certified, sending them out to everybody we could that we knew was pushing these shots that they shouldn't have been pushing without informed consent. And told them we were going to hold them accountable, and that's just going to all play out, and that they were going to get themselves in trouble if they weren't being more forthright with the general public.
Well, and to me, even more egregious was the requirement for children to have these. I'm an adult, and I might say, okay, just give it to me, whatever. I get to choose that, but children are having two layers of people choosing for them: their parents, the doctors, or schools that required it for them to play sports or to show up for school or to go to camp. They're having all these layers of people making these decisions for them, and we find out after the fact that these drug companies never had any kind of result showing that this shot would slow the spread, and now these children are potentially set up for all kinds of side effects.
I know, it's heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking when it was happening because I had a lot of friends, I guess you could say, contacts around the community because I take care of a lot of people in the community. I had them calling me and saying, what would you do? My daughter's got this great scholarship to go to this great university, and they won't let her go without getting a shot. What would you do? And that was a tough choice for those parents. And I did tell them, I said, I would hold my child back. And they're like, well, I can't justify holding them back without solid proof. And I said, well, the only proof we have is there's nothing. They're not presenting the facts, you know. And that was a really tough decision for a lot of parents to make, and it was horribly heartbreaking. And all, you know, as you know, all these kids in these sports and activities are dropping dead of heart attacks from the adrenaline rushes and stuff. I mean, thousands of them. You know, we don't hear about them. They don't talk about them. But if you get in the encrypted world of communication, you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them dropping dead all over the world.
Well, and as an attorney, I had people reach out to me, and I had one person who said she was the executive assistant to the CEO of her company, and when people applied to have, what do you call it, an exemption, so she wouldn't have to get the vaccine for work, she actually had an issue where the vaccine was contraindicated, and she read a memo that came through and said anybody who applies for an exemption, accept them, sit on them for a couple of weeks so they'll feel that we went through them, and then we're going to just deny them all. I had a healthcare worker who works for a large provider reach out to me, and she said she was told by a doctor within her own healthcare sick care organization that their policy is even if that shot is contraindicated, their policy is there will be no exemption letters. That to me, it's bad for the CEO. It is horrific that someone who has taken an oath to do no harm would have a policy like that. How do you trust your healthcare providers at that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also want to go back to what was said. We did have some information. I mean, we did have people like Dr. Sherry Tenpenny telling us that these mRNA shots were not safe and they were dangerous. She was going through all the mechanisms of injury, and she had said early on that we were going to have a depopulation as a result of these things because they had tested them in animals and the animals died. And there was no proof at all that they had worked in them, and they never did studies on humans, you know, before they just released it on the public. It was an insane thing that they did. But
maybe it's just me as a lay person, but even if the animals didn't die, if they didn't test it on humans, some scientists might say that humans and animals are different.
But the worst
if something's good for a mouse, it might not be good for a human.
Exactly, right? And then the worst part of that whole thing to me is they were pushing it on pregnant women. And that was just sick. Just James Thorpe is the expert in obstetrics and gynecology, and he sees more high-risk female pregnancy women than I think anybody in the world. He's been a great guest on our show at the FLCCC, and the information he has shared is just shocking. It's just, and they've been pushing it on pregnant women from the beginning. They're trying to tell them, oh, you got to take this to be safe. And every doctor in every gynecology office was pushing this, and it was just shocking to see that happen. It was mind-blowing. So we had people that were going around and trying to inform these physicians and these doctors, but they were so brainwashed or controlled by money. You know, we couldn't figure out why we couldn't get through to them. They were just like robots, just, you know, trying to give out as many shots as they could. I mean, I saw people on Facebook, nurses saying, yay, I gave 400 shots today. And I'm telling this nurse, you have got to stop that. There's so much proof showing that that's dangerous. Why are you announcing that? Why are you trying to get people to take these dang shots? You need to stop. And we get in these crazy arguments, and it was just insane. The whole thing was just insane. But
well, it was unfortunate to see all these people goose-stepping along to follow something that some of them had to know it wasn't the right thing. I mean, I do feel like these medical providers were following politics instead of science. They're following grant money instead of science. It is my understanding, and maybe you can speak more to this, that if someone was labeled as COVID, well, first of all, when there were shutdowns, all of these optional elective surgeries went away. So hospitals were losing quite an income stream. But then, if somebody was labeled as potentially COVID, they were receiving bonuses for this. Like anybody who followed the protocol was making money. This is blood money. These people were making money off of symptoms consistent with and pushing a shot that they had to know was either not effective or there was just no informed consent. Maybe they didn't know anything about it, but that means you don't know enough to give it to someone else.
Well, we have all the patents and the research that shows that they knew darn well what it was. They also knew that the tests didn't work, the COVID test, PCR tests. And we also know that the CDC combined, they made a category called PIC, which included pneumonia, influenza, and COVID, all in the same category. So everybody was like, oh, flu disappeared. It didn't disappear. They combined it with COVID. So we actually had flu and influenza in this PIC category. And every test that showed any of those three, which picked up dead fragments, thousands of dead fragments, and you can have these fragments in your body for over a year or longer. But these dead fragments were making this test positive depending on how high they turn the cycles. They put it over 35 cycles in the lab, and you test positive for COVID. So they put everybody on this track of following the hospital protocol for COVID, and they'd make about $200,000 per person that they put on that protocol. And I've taken care of people on the ventilator. And with the compromised lungs that these people had, there was like no way they were going to get off of these darn ventilators. But then they were giving them sedatives. They were giving them midazolam was one of the ones that they used in the nursing homes heavily. They had increased the dose on that. Then they were giving them remdesivir. And sadly today, there's still doctors giving remdesivir because I'm still getting phone calls from family members saying, how do I get these doctors to stop giving my mother remdesivir? It just blows my mind that that's still going on today. But they're making a ton of money. And I have nurse friends that, were whistleblowers calling me up and telling me, hey, they're marking these patients, COVID or not COVID, they're blocking the family. We've gone through so much torment over the last 3 years. Not us, I say me, but it's actually the families that have been tormented. I've had veterans whose family were thrown out of the hospital. They blocked them, and veterans who had to be fed. And they wouldn't let the family come in to feed their father, for instance. We had one here in Virginia, not far from here. They said, we'll take care of it. We'll feed him. Well, it took them 10 days to get an injunction to get into the hospital to find out that he died the next day. They starved him to death. And that was just a crushing horror story. It was awful. Then we have other patients whose spouses would call. They had family in California. The son was on, they work for the healthcare system out there, the sick care system, I should say. They wanted him on the hospital protocol. This woman's husband, who was his father, he wanted him on the hospital protocol. He told his mother she was crazy, let him give him the remdesivir. And she had the power of attorney for healthcare decision making, yet this son in California trumped her power of attorney for healthcare decision making. She was removed from the hospital, blocked from coming back in. When she tried to come in, they sent guards down to stop her from coming in. A month later, they called her to tell her that Dad's dying. You can come up for 15 minutes to say goodbye to your husband. So she came to the hospital. Guards met her at the door, and that's right here locally. Met her at the door. On the way up there, she's like, I want to see the paperwork that says that my son is now the power of attorney for healthcare decision making for my husband. And they're like, you're not here. We're not here to talk about that. You're here to say goodbye to your loved ones or to spend time with your loved ones. And she got 15 minutes, and they escorted her back out. I mean, these are the kind of crazy things we've dealt with.
This is horrifying. I mean, this is like martial law, locking people down. It is astounding how many people thought they were going to be saving lives by strapping a mask on their face or walking around with gloves on or following tape arrows on a floor in a store because, And then again, there was mask when you stand, take it off when you sit because apparently safe, safe, dangerous, safe, None of this stuff made any sense. There was no logical A to B, B to C, but people jumped on it because the stuff was on a constant loop. And the mask and the constant loop on, for the media was to keep that fear right there because people will do anything if they're afraid. They're not even thinking for themselves anymore. Yeah. But I will tell you, I got COVID right at the beginning, before there was a COVID test. And I've since spoken with my doctor who said, oh yeah, you definitely had COVID. I had every symptom, and they did a strep test, and they did a flu test, and they ran everything. And the doctor finally said, I've given you every test I can think of that would be consistent with your symptoms. Everyone has come out negative. We don't know what you have, but anything else we treated with these symptoms, we'd give you a Z-Pack. So we're going to give you a Z-Pack. I had been so sick for about 10 days that I was sleeping on the couch because I couldn't take the stairs. I was out of breath walking from the couch to the bathroom. She gave me a Z-Pack. In 3 days I was fine. Yeah. Except for I couldn't smell anything for about a week. That was kind of the last thing. Because I remember we went to lunch and the waitress said, how's your food? And I said, I don't know, it's probably good. I can't taste anything. I can't smell anything. But we didn't know at that time that was a symptom. And so I look at all these horrific treatments that people had since then, and a Z-Pack.
And that protocol was Dr. Zelenko's in the very beginning. A Z-Pack and doxycycline were part of his protocol. And he called the then President of the United States and told him, this is what's going to treat people that have this disease. And they blocked him all over the place. But I got a copy of the protocol, and my friends got copies of it, and we sent it to as many people as we could so that people could be aware that that was part of what would treat them. And we knew that lung infection was something that kicked in immediately. So if they had any lung involvement, that was one of the things we told them. You take a Z-Pack or the doxycycline. We told them where to get the antibiotics without having to go into the health scare system. We had places online they could order where you don't have to get a prescription. And that news, I think, saved a lot of lives and brought us to where we are today. If we did not have these brave doctors, like Dr. Zelenko and Dr. Merrick, who is an absolute hero.
Yes, he is.
I've been working with him for quite some time, or his team. If we didn't have them, and Dr. Corey and the rest of them, we would be in a much different place now, excuse me. I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here talking.
So we have a question.
We have several. There's a lady from Florida. Her just gave a comment. First, do no harm.
Absolutely.
The next one, a lady here in Virginia Beach. How many people died from the vaccine? And another lady said, how can anyone trust the CDC?
They can't.
And another one says, how much were doctors and medical providers paid to give the shot, which is more than any regular vaccine?
Yeah, that was a complex, structured payment system from my understanding. I don't know enough about the financial side. I do know I heard them say, for the diagnosis they get, I had it all written on signs because I went and I protested at the courthouses and when I was defending Dr. Merrick in Norfolk and in D.C. We had groups of us going up there. And also I got to mention Dr. Fury as well.
Yes.
She's the head of the Virginia Medical Freedom Alliance organization, which I'm trying to be actively part of. I've just been so darn busy with so many things. But she's a hero, and she speaks all over Virginia and does everything she can to spread the word and help people. And right now, and I'm sorry, do you want to address some of those questions?
Yeah, how many people have died?
Oh gosh, a good source for that is Banners for Freedom. Robbie and Jamie Agee are amazing. They go around speaking, and they keep up with the numbers. They have magnets, they have billboards they put up in New York City that tell you how many people have died. They go on open bears. Actually, you can find that on our website on the VirginiaMedicalFreedomAlliance.org. We have links where you can go into the open bears and look at the data of how many people died. And
so that's Virginia Medical Freedom Alliance, exactly. And then what was the other one? Banner?
Oh, Banners for Freedom.
Banners for Freedom.
Is that another great source for information?
Is there an acronym for that for .com?
For Virginia Medical Freedom?
Yes.
It's VAMFA.org. VAMFA.org.
So, and that'll be entered into the chat for anybody who wants to pick up on that later. A couple of things. One is, I think one of the things that was used to contribute to fear to keep people under control was there was no distinction made between dying with COVID and dying of COVID. For instance, if I have cancer and I get into a car accident and it kills me, I died with cancer, but I didn't die of cancer. And so we saw people, and I spoke to people who, ran funeral homes, and there were people who never had a diagnosis, but they had symptoms consistent with COVID, so it was put down as a COVID-related death. So if you had a fever and the sniffles, but you actually succumb to cancer or a car accident.
Which could have also been pneumonia or influenza.
Exactly. And so it really contributed to that fear because there was no distinction made between those. And so they used it to bump up the numbers.
And in the beginning, I saw it on the CDC website that they had people that died of COVID or from COVID, I forgot the exact word, and then they had people that died with COVID. And I saw it, and the next day,
It's gone.
They changed it.
because it showed up on social media,
Yeah.
and it changed. Now it's just all died with COVID.
Right. Yeah, they've been manipulating a lot of the data to confuse the public. It's just been a nightmare in that regard.
Well, and I believe this was, I think most people realize now this was deliberate. This was a gain-of-function experiment. And it was put out there, and then there was mass hysteria to control people. And I think that the goal was to shut people down and control them. And I believe that has backfired to some degree. I think people got really sucked in at the beginning because there are some people who still trust what they see on TV. I'm not sure why, but they do. Or social media, or healthcare professionals. I don't
the CDC,
trust most of them.
don't trust the CDC still today. It's just crazy.
Well, and this deserves a little mention before I get to what I was getting ready to ask you, is, we had all these CDC mandates, but if you go to the CDC website, the only authority the CDC really has is if people are entering the country and there's some reason to believe that they have something infectious, they can detain them long enough to determine whether they do or do not, and that's it. They have no authority to make mandates. They have no authority to do anything beyond that.
Right.
They can make recommendations, but that's it.
That's right.
And we had schools and governments talking about the CDC mandates, and there is no such thing.
That's right. People have autonomy. They need to know their rights. They need to study
They do.
their rights.
But what I was working toward here, just kind of, as we mentioned the CDC, kind of an aside, I do believe that all of this was deliberate and it was a control thing. And I think much like shutting down the schools, it made people pay more attention, and I think it's kind of backfired. Do you find that people are taking more control over their own health because they're afraid of other people making decisions for them?
Absolutely. I get people asking me all the time, do you have any naturopathic doctors, functional medicine doctors? So we have directories, several organizations do. React 19 is one of them. Our Virginia Medical Freedom has some resources. There's doctors all over the country that are, we call it COVID aware or FLCCC friendly, because FLCCC tends to be the gold standard around the world. I mean, we have doctors.
And tell people what FLCCC means.
Yes, the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance, and that's flccc.net, N-E-T. So anyway, they have doctors that have joined them from all over the world. We have a conference every year. We had one down in Fort Worth where doctors came in from far, far away places, but brilliant minds that don't fall victim to whatever the CDC or whatever health agencies tell them. They actually think for themselves. They actually do real research. They look for conflicts of interest, pharma connections, big industry connections in these studies. There's so many studies that are not correct, and so many doctors just blindly follow all these studies. But Dr. Merrick makes a point to do deep research to get to the truth. He used to be allopathic. He prides himself in recognizing that he had been a victim, or not a victim, but a follower of the system for, he's probably 50, 60 years. I'm not even sure how many years it was, but for a long, long time as a critical care doctor, which I actually worked with him, crossed paths with him in the hospitals here, but for many, many years he was an allopathic doctor who, is trained by pharmaceutical.
What does that mean, allopathic?
Allopathic, I mean, they typically just hand out pills.
Okay.
Expensive pills, not the natural stuff. But Dr. Merrick is one who actually had introduced the sepsis protocol years ago, and he got a lot of flack for that. He had been fighting that battle for I don't know how many years, probably at least a decade or so. But he knew it worked. He was treating people with sepsis, and the pharmacy industry didn't like that. He's recently been recognized as being right, and he's done an amazing job proving his points, and his research is solid, and it's been solid through everything that he's done with the FLCCC. And I've been a weekly Q&A nurse with the FLCCC, so I do support them fully, and I have a lot of pride in that organization. So if anybody has any need for any questions or protocols or anything, I highly recommend that as a source. They've got protocols for treating, or for early treatment, long COVID, vaccine injuries. They've also got flu RSV protocols. They've got nutraceuticals for pregnancy. They've got protocols for pretty much anything you can think of, and they lean toward nutraceuticals instead of pharmaceuticals. So he, for instance, had diabetes, and doctors are led to believe that diabetes is a chronic condition that you can't treat. But he did the research and realized that he could treat it, so he treated himself. He got off of the regular insulins and whatnot, changed his diet, changed his lifestyle, got on the supplements, realized how helpful things like berberine are, reversed his diabetes. He said he'll never have diabetes again because he understands it now, and he doesn't listen to the big pharmaceutical or allopathic world on how to treat it anymore. So he's been treating thousands and thousands, or helping people treat themselves. That's the key.
I have reversed mine as well. I'm fully on board.
That's
We
wonderful.
have some more questions.
How do we help these organizations Pamela Burnham has mentioned?
Pamela Burnham is
Full
sufficient.
name.
That's where it shows up on Facebook.
And the other thing is, are any of these protocols that you all have done for COVID and other associated,
I can't say I've done them. Dr. Merrick and Dr. Corey and the doctors have done them there.
have any of them crossed over to any other bad diseases like pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer?
As a matter of fact, Dr. Merrick is, this week, upcoming week, I believe, is a seminar, a webinar on cancer. He's done a lot of deep research on cancer, and he's getting ready to launch that, I believe, on, what's today?
The 13th.
Maybe it's
the 12th. The 12th. Today's the 12th.
Maybe it's Wednesday. You'll have to look at the site. If you go to the home page, you'll be able to see him talking about cancer and the research he's done there. So what he says is more than 80% of cancers are curable.
Even pancreatic?
Nah, it might be one of the 20%, but you'll have to wait.
Pancreatic is just so aggressive that
one.
usually by the time you have a diagnosis, it's fairly far gone,
but
is it not?
I should say preventable or curable. So it doesn't have to come to that. Lifestyle changes. Lifestyle has a lot to do with many of the pancreatic cancers that we see, sadly. But just changing your diet is huge. I mean, people eat way too much processed food.
And sugar.
And that's part of the processed food. You know, sugars are deadly.
Cancer's a sugar feeder.
Yeah, it is. I think all diseases are a sugar feeder, or most are, but we used to just think it was bacteria, but yeah, sugar's, it's a deadly, deadly product. So all these simple carbs, when they say count carbs, they're talking about the simple carbs, not the complex carbs. Complex carbs are healthy. Those are the carbs that actually have the nutrients included, the fiber and the layers on the actual food.
Even with the bacteria, talking about bacteria versus sugar, I'm a tea drinker, and I drink my tea plain. But if you make a pitcher of iced tea plain and a pitcher of iced tea with sugar, leave those pitchers sitting out on a warm day, and the next morning there is bacteria on top of the one with sugar. There's none on the other one. It's that fast. It ferments and it grows. It's a perfect environment for anything like that.
Right. And if you're not diabetes sensitive, like me, I use maple syrup, or pure honey in small amounts, or the actual stevia plant, which you can muddle. You know, you can mash the stevia leaves and put them in your tea, or just make a cup of tea in there, and it's very sweet. If you get stevia in the stores, there's stuff added to that is not so healthy. Then you're going processed again. Most everything you get in the store is processed. So anything natural they can't patent or put a label on. So I advise, trying to grow your own food. I actually have an indoor garden. I have hydroponic gardening inside my house because I don't want to be buying the stuff in the stores, honestly.
Right.
The bugs are a pain outside. I have an outdoor garden and an indoor garden, and I strongly recommend everybody tries that themselves. You'd be amazed at how easy hydroponic gardening is. I have what's called a tower garden, and I have that because a lot of my cancer patients were Juice Plus supporters. They were doing the resveratrol, and then Tower Gardens teamed up with the company Juice Plus. So my cancer patients turned me on to it, and I just love it. I love it. A lot of restaurants have these tower gardens on the rooftops. A lot of airports even have
I've
them.
seen some.
Yeah.
We have a restaurant on Shore Drive that it's outdoors, but they're out there cutting their own herbs.
Yeah, and as far as that goes, people need to be aware, and this needs to spread far and wide. A certain person bought up a lot of farmland in this country, over 400,000 acres, and he has shown his colors. He's got this company called APEEL, APEEL.com, You can go on there, put in your location, and see what stores are selling his products. You need to stay away from those products. They're infused with, I haven't seen this data, I've just heard from our encrypted sources that I pay attention to that there's nanoparticle infused ingredients in this food.
What was the address?
APEEL.com. Now, just a week ago, I was in Europe. I looked on their site and there wasn't any here. This week, I pulled it up and it's all over the place. It's in Fresh Market. It's in Target. And what I saw just a couple days ago when I looked, it was the avocados, the apples, and the limes are being infused with this stuff that he's trying to get into our bodies to make us sick.
And if I can also mention on that, all of these products are labeled organic.
Yes, exactly.
And this product, this APEEL,
Just see.
yeah, it just nullifies everything as far as it being organic, plus in addition adding the damage of
This technology that God knows what it's going to do to our bodies.
Yeah.
Well, here's one of the problems with organic, and a lot of people hang their hats on it, but I mean, if you're just growing stuff in your backyard, not using chemicals, frankly, that's organic. If something's already good for you, not adding something to it, that's organic, that's good. But to be clear, feces is organic. That doesn't mean you should ingest it. So just because something says organic, you still have to do a little bit of research sometimes.
Well, support your local farmers.
Absolutely.
Ask them what they use on their products or what they use on their supplies. I go to the farmers markets. It's amazing. I used to go to farmers markets in the past occasionally, and they were kind of, not many people, kind of boring or whatever. Occasionally I'd pick up a few things here and there. But the farmers markets have grown.
You have to fight the crowds now because
gosh.
people are onto them.
And they have so much wonderful stuff.
The
Lori
tomatoes.
is our girl here locally that manages the farmers markets. And you go there and you can talk to the farmers, the people, the representatives themselves, and they'll tell you, yeah, we don't inject our cows. We have never injected our cows with any vaccines. I asked some farmers here locally about that last time I went, and I was so happy to hear that. So everybody needs to get out there and do their research and, protect what you're putting in your body is your temple.
Absolutely.
You need to be careful what you're putting in your mouth, especially when you get these evil geniuses.
So I think
hurt us.
at one point when doctors were following what is termed standard of care, it probably was not a terrible thing. And that was when you had local doctors and they knew their patients and they were doing house calls. But I think as corporations swallowed all of this up and insurance companies started making healthcare decisions for people, and now the government is making healthcare decisions for people, standard of care, that whole phrase is kind of a cop-out. I mean, it's like hearing people in 2020 saying, follow the science, and nobody was talking about science.
Right.
Standard of care doesn't seem to be care anymore. So that automatically, when a doctor uses that phrase, that's a red flag for me. But given all that's happened the last few years and how a lot of the blinders have come off people, what do you see as the future of healthcare? What direction do we need to be going in?
Well, a lot of the things we've talked about, you need to improve your lifestyle, improve your health, get yourselves off of big pharma medications. Because as we stand right now, they have so much power, we can't take them down. A lot of the, and I hate to say this, but probably nearly all of the congressmen even are victims or receiving money from big pharma, and they're not going to budge. I mean, we've had some success with one or two just getting the information out, but most of them aren't going to help create any kind of legislation or help work with them to change anything that we're in right now. As long as we feed big pharma, they're going to keep killing us, and that's what they're doing. They're killing us. They're making a killing with all the money they're making. So people need to improve their health. They need to get off of big pharma medications. They need to look for holistic practitioners, functional medicine, integrative practitioners. I'm actually going to go back to school and get an advanced practice degree and go into holistic medicine and start, giving people more nutraceutical time. I'm going to be able to prescribe. That's what I want to do. I want to be able to help people get off of big pharma. I mean, I've done it with diet, but there's so many other things that people can be taken to help make it easier for them, because not everybody can eat as healthy as some do. So I don't know. There's just a lot for people to learn. They need to get out there and do their homework and take care of themselves and take care of their families and their children.
Well, and some of the guidelines for instance, I'm not a salt fan. I just don't care for salt especially. So I've always avoided it. And I switched to a functional medicine doctor, and the longer I've been with her, the better I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me, you really need more sodium. And I was like, well, guidelines this and everybody else. Forget the guidelines. So I now have a potassium and sodium supplement in my water. I don't think I've ever felt this good in my entire life because I quit following the guidelines and actually listened to her. And that was such a simple nutritional tweak. And I know that there are tons of things like that.
Right. And I think it's important to note that celery is very high in salt. So you can get some celery sticks, have it out as a snack to eat on a regular basis, put a little peanut butter on it or something. Put some raisins on it. And my mother-in-law always says, ants on a log was their favorite snack growing up as children. So
That's true.
that is a very high salt vegetable. And along with that, you're getting some great fiber. It's going to keep you regular, especially if you're older. A lot of older people have constipation issues. So eat more fiber, and get your salt at the same time.
Well, and do we have more questions?
Yeah. One mentioned no processed food. The other one, another person said vitamins. And somebody else asked do a plug for Delegate Karen Greenhaw, who's doing great work on the healthcare issues, I guess, or something. Is she involved in it?
She is, and Dr. Fury has spent some time conversing with her, and that is out of my realm of what I do, unfortunately.
Well, another just
but I can
wrote
address vitamins.
Broccoli a day keeps you regular.
That'll help.
So my question.
Shockingly, the salt does too. I did not know that.
Well, I use salt because it has iodine. And have you ever eaten popcorn without salt on it?
I don't like
here's the
popcorn.
thing about salt that has iodine. Most salts today don't. They've got the sea salt. They've got the kosher salts. They don't have iodine. So a trick to that is to add kelp powder. And you got to be careful not to use too much kelp powder. But that's all you need. You don't need to get Morton's iodized salt. There's so many things you can do at home. So many tricks you can use that.
Once
you
you
can
bleach
get a
all that
thing of-
stuff, you've undone whatever benefit
Right.
too.
But if you use kelp powder, which has also omegas and everything else, it's got so many great nutrients. It's great for your thyroid. It's beneficial in so many ways.
So one other question personally. When you're talking about the diets and the right food, I've had both bladder cancer and kidney cancer. And how would I know what foods caused it or whatever? What should I not have eaten or whatever? And
Well, processed food is the enemy in every way. I mean, you've got to stay away from like anything white that's been stripped of its nutrients, the white
So bread and
flours,
sugar
the
every
white
meal?
grains, the sugars, even the salt is not good.
And another thing that I'm seeing from my own prayer list, the amount of women who now have breast cancer
I
just
know.
seems to be, it's
Well,
just not stopping.
Have you heard of turbo cancer?
Turbo,
Turbo cancer is a new term that's come about since, I hate to say it, but since the shots have come out for COVID. Turbo cancer is something we're dealing with at the FLCCC, and it's huge all around the world.
And what does that
I know.
mean?
It's like suddenly you have stage 3 or stage 4 cancer. Didn't even have a clue that you had cancer at all, and all of a sudden you got stage 4 cancer and you're dead in a month. We're seeing so much of that, and we're seeing the health scare system makes a ton of money on chemo, and that's usually the first thing they run to is chemo for treatment of any kind of cancer. I mean, when you get to that point and it's that bad, sometimes you don't have any other choice. But you need to talk to more naturopathic doctors. I mean, watch our webinar this week. Go to the site and find out when this new cancer research is going to be released by Dr. Merrick, and you'll learn a whole lot about cancer, I guarantee it. He gathers the top experts around the world, and they will go into great depth and detail on that.
So even prior to this shot, we had doctors passing pills out like candy. Statins are one that come to mind.
Big.
Metformin. Those don't seem like really good choices to me.
No. And, the wellness company comes to mind when you're talking about blood clots. A lot of people are dealing with clots these days. There is a formula called the Spike Support made by Dr. McCullough and team at the Wellness Company. A lot of the airline pilots are taking this. It's got nattokinase, selenium, black sativa, dandelion root. Anyway, it's got those ingredients. I might have covered them, might be one more, but that's keeping them from developing blood clots and, having heart attacks midair and planes going down. So that's a huge resource that I recommend that anybody who's been injected or anybody who gets exposed consider taking. The nattokinase is a great declutter, and it's got a lot of other great qualities too. And all it is a fermented soy, and it's not. They don't use the soy that Gates and Company make, or whoever, the people that are destroying our food and putting all this. You were talking about organic, but I want to point out the distinction between genetically modified foods, and that these are foods that we've been using for decades. And what they did initially was take something like a ragweed. It took ragweed, the components of that, they crossed it with what looks like a banana or whatever, and you've got a genetically modified banana. So it acts like ragweed in your body. If you go to Europe, people say, when we go to America, your food tastes terrible. It has no taste at all. That's because we're eating stuff like ragweed. It looks like an apple, doesn't taste like an apple. It looks like a strawberry, doesn't taste like a strawberry. It has no taste at all. So anyway, these genetically modified foods that we've been eating for decades are making us sick too. So bring me back to our original point. Because I got off track there.
Well, so passing out these medicines like candies, I mean, so, and if someone comes to you and says, well, my cholesterol's high and, my doctor's prescribed these statins, which maybe I use this phrase too much, but I think they're the devil.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Merrick will totally agree with you.
Right. So, I mean, instead, why are doctors not recommending dietary changes?
Exactly. Well, because I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Flexner Report. Have you heard of the Flexner Report? That came out in the early 1900s. That was developed by the Rockefellers and some other characters, and what it did is it shut down all the naturopathic types of training in the medical schools. They took over the medical schools, they took over the hospitals, they got rid of all the naturopathic ways, and they joined forces with Big Pharma, and this is how they began making their big money. The doctors get maybe an hour of dietary education in the entire, 9 years of training that they get in the hospitals. Most doctors don't have a clue about nutrition, most of the allopathic doctors. And as a matter of fact, when I'm working in the ICU, my patients will say, how come the doctor tells me one thing about what to eat, and he hands me a sheet of paper from the American Heart Association, American Cancer Society, or whatever, that tells me something else, the nutritionist comes in and tells me something else, and now you're telling me this, we're on the, what my thoughts are on it. But, and I was like, because, they don't get the training that they need in medical school. They don't.
I asked a doctor about it, and I said, how much do you study nutrition in medical school? He said, next to nothing. And I was giving him some examples, because we were talking about pain management. It was kind of in that context. But, I mean, just a few examples. My father was in the hospital, because we talked about it when he was in the hospital. And he was diagnosed as pre-diabetic when he was 50. He's now 85. He's never been on insulin. While he was in the hospital, they had to give him insulin because he was on a diabetic-friendly diet, which means they give him all the simple carbs that they give everyone else, but they count them. And when he got out of the hospital, he's no longer on insulin. The only time he's ever taken it is when he was in there with hospital nutritionists giving him food. I also have two friends who have pretty similar body types, close in age, and the same type of medical diagnoses. And they are fibromyalgia and lupus. So chronic pain. One of them follows a ketogenic diet and has only had one flare-up in the last 6 years because she had a piece of birthday cake at somebody's. She's like, it's one piece of cake. What's it going to hurt? Well, it hurt her. My other friend, her doctor has told her that's bad for her, and she has been on all kinds of drugs for years, and she's still in pain. And I'm like, well, why don't you try this kind of diet? It costs you nothing. I'm not selling you anything. And if it doesn't work, go back to what you were doing.
Right.
And the doctor has strongly advised against it. And she instead takes narcotics. It makes no sense.
I know. And what they also do is the patients that we have on ventilators, they put them on a TPN or parental diet, which is high in sugar. So the tube feeding that we give the patients is so high in sugar, drives their sugar levels out of this roof, and we're constantly giving every patient insulin injections throughout the day.
What is
Checking
TPN?
total parenteral nutrition
Okay.
through the vessels or through the stomach. So
Okay.
it either goes through a major vessel or it goes through a tube through the stomach.
So they're shooting sugar into them and then giving them
Tons of
insulin to
sugar.
fight the sugar.
Yeah, I mean,
Good
pharmacy creates it, but it's still very high in sugar.
So one of the things I would also ask about is, and maybe this is the root of some of this, I've been in doctors' offices when the pharma people come in with their little bags, and I watched a doctor prescribe, because my daughter went for a long time, the same medicine to everybody. Like everybody in the waiting room was talking about, same medicine to everybody. Abilify. Every kid in there was taking that, which you should obviously never give to a kid. In hindsight, I know that. But what role does that play? Like, what is it they are promising doctors to get them to experiment with these things?
Well, they get a kickback. You know, same thing with, just like with the COVID shots. The more shots they give, or even the flu shots, the more they have a quota. They meet a certain quota, they get a chunk of money. If they sell so many of this pharmaceuticals product, they're going to get a chunk of money. They'll give them free samples, get everybody, hooked on it like it's candy. They hand it out to everybody.
Do they have to disclose that?
I don't know enough about that. No.
Maybe that's a little piece of legislation that should be worked on.
I tell
If
you
you
what,
are
Dr.
receiving a
Merrick,
kickback from a pharmaceutical company, you should have to disclose that.
Yeah, there's a lot of monopolization going on out there against us.
And I didn't mean to cut you off. You were
No,
starting to talk
no.
about Dr. Merrick.
I was just going to say Dr. Merrick and Dr. Corey have dug pretty deep in this because they've gone and talked to Senator Ron Johnson and was it Rand Paul, I think. So they've come up with a lot of the numbers and they've done a lot of research on that. So if you go back into some of their interviews earlier on, they talk about how they're getting supplemented, they're getting incentives to push not only the drugs but the shots as well. So, yeah. And the hospitals are so controlled.
So while they may not have a sign up or hand you something with the medicine, if you ask a doctor a plain question, what do you receive for this? Are they bound to tell you? Do you know that? I don't know.
Well, I don't know exactly, but I know
Because if they're not doing anything wrong, they shouldn't have any problem disclosing it.
think.
Okay.
And again, I don't know enough about the monetary transactions between the doctors, the hospitals, and Big Pharma. I don't know. I know I've heard about it. I just don't know the details.
Yes.
I have a public service announcement, I guess, because Pam, you've written a book, correct?
Eat grass, kick ass.
That's it.
That was my daughter who suggested I give it a catchy title. She was 25 at the time.
Your editor gave me a copy for Christmas last year.
Oh yeah? Which editor? Huh. You'll have to tell me. Anyway.
So you recommend it. Where do people get it?
Oh, well, right now you can get it on Amazon, which I'm also not a fan of. But my site is down. I haven't had a chance to fix it, but I'm going to work on that tomorrow, getting my site back up. But it's plantbasedoneright.com.
So eat tree bark and things like that.
No,
No.
you don't have to just
She's
eat
not
grass.
Yul Gibbons.
So what it does is it teaches you how to eat whole food given to us by God and nature, you know. It teaches you how to replace all the processed food that has been pushed in us mostly since World War II. I don't know if you realize how bad the food has gotten since World War II, but we feel it's all, you know, boxed food is the way, you know. Before, in our grandparents' generation, we didn't have so many sick people. I mean, if you look at the numbers, the data, how much it's changed since World War II, since all the fast food industries kicked in.
We're going to put a cover, a picture of your book up there.
Thank you.
Eat grass, kick ass.
Yeah, plant-based.
And it works for mules, so
yeah,
they
well,
kick.
there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's helped a lot of people. I've got husbands that call me and tell me, you know, my wife is married to your book, you know, and then I have wives saying, you know, your book is better than chocolate. It's a lot of fun. I didn't realize how much fun I'd have putting out a book like that, but I haven't even had to sell it. When I published it or put it out, COVID hit, so I dropped it like a hot potato. But it has sold itself. It has sold itself over 600 copies without any effort, which is mind blowing for me. But I'm getting ready to. I'm going to be putting out a second edition with simpler recipes. So the second half is recipes. The first half is baby steps, tips on how to improve your lifestyle, how to improve your diet, and making sense of what's going on in your body. How there's spices in there that help ease cancer. One of my favorite things for my cancer patients, and any patient really, or anybody with any disorders, is a morning smoothie. I mean, Dr. Merrick and we have realized how important intermittent fasting is. So you got to figure out what time of day fasting works for you. But I'm a firm advocate of doing a smoothie every day, and that's a 60% vegetable to 40% fruit. So you don't want to get carried away with your fruit. A lot of people like a sweet smoothie. You don't need to add ice cream, and you don't need to use a lot of
smoothie
fruit.
once you add ice cream.
Right. So what you want to do is get a lot of greens. Get your greens up. Greens are so important. They're so important for protecting your vessels, for developing the nitric oxide that lines your vessels, and to prevent inflammation.
So if I may
Yes.
step in there on the fasting, everybody's been start fasting.
Mm-hmm.
One of our other guests here in the studio is Tony Hedrick, and she and all these other women that I know are you going to fast today? 17 hours, whatever. But the issue is, okay, if I go to bed tonight
Mm-hmm.
at, say, 10 o'clock, and I don't get up until tomorrow at 6 o'clock, so that's 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't eaten.
That's not
fasting.
That's not long enough.
fasting.
So here's the guidelines, and people are going to be a little not happy with this one, but so you basically have to do at least 14 to 16 hours of fasting, and when you get to that 14th hour, you basically have to do, and I have to go back and look at the guidelines, and everybody can fast differently, but from what I've surmised from the research is you got to do at least 14 hours, and when you get to that 14th hour, I mean, Dr. Merrick says you can take your supplements early on, but there are supplements that will enhance your fasting and help repair, and those are resveratrol and spermidine, and there are foods that also contain those products, like grapefruit and what's that? It's not
Grapes.
Flaxseed.
Grapes.
No, wheat germ has a lot of spermidine in it. But anyway, if you go on our site, their site, I shouldn't call it my site, I didn't put the site together, but it's flccc.net. There is a section in there on fasting, intermittent fasting. But also, Dr. Suzanne Gazda is the neurology expert. We have a lot of people that have a lot of neurological symptoms, not only from long COVID, but also from post-shots. So what she had shown, and Dr. Cole showed us down in Fort Worth, Texas last month, I guess, maybe it's 2 months ago, was how deep the spike protein gets into the brain tissue, into your skull, and the deep parts of your brain. So for fasting to heal your brain, you need 4 days, is what Dr. Suzanne Gazda says, to repair a lot of the damage in your brain. So I did an 8-day fast because I had ringing in my head. When I got COVID, I was taking care of, well, not just the whole world, but my 87-year-old mother-in-law, I have people that had borderline MS, and they're at high risk, and then my husband and my son and myself all got sick at the same time. We had everything we needed. I took the hydroxychloroquine and whatever I had at the time, because it was early on.
So we're getting close to the end of time, but I wanted to point out something very quickly. Intermittent fasting is daily, and we're looking at about 14 hours before you hit autophagy. When she is discussing a 4-day or 8-day fast, this is not to do every week.
No.
These are, I don't want people to think they have to fast 4 days every week.
No. But if
to
you
get
go
these
on
benefits.
and you listen to the brain expert, Dr. Suzanne Gazda, if you have neurological problems, she will be able to explain in detail some of the things you can do.
So you don't eat for 4 days?
Well, what you do is supplements and water. You can do your supplements. They fill you up, actually. I take my plant-based vitamins, my vitamin C, my vitamin D, whatever
I
supplements
have water and
normally
plain
do.
tea when I fast, no calories.
Yeah, I can't do an all-water fast. I get hungry. But they say you get over the hunger pains in, I think, a day or so. But
That's what they say about prisoner of war camps.
yeah.
No brain disorders there.
But it did a lot. It was pretty amazing. It was working so well for me. 8 days was nothing, which is crazy. But I don't recommend it without medical supervision. You definitely want to consult your doctor, consult someone you trust to go through that.
So we are at the end of our time. We only have a couple of minutes left. We wanted to, first we want to thank our guest, Pamela Burnham, for all of the insight we've gotten from her. We would also like to give a shout out to Senator Bill Distaff. Every week this podcast comes from his office. He allows us to broadcast from here. He is wonderful at getting involved like that to get information out there. This is not for his own gain. He doesn't pick any topics. He just lets us use his space. and we truly appreciate that. It's a way to get a lot of information out to people, and we are also happy if people drop ideas for topics you would like to see us discuss for future guests. I will be here for the next 3 weeks, sitting in for the always here Councilman Moss, who is taking just a little break, having some family time. But I'll be here for the next 3 weeks, and then he will be back on week 4 in his regular seat. And we hope you'll join us next week at 7 p.m.
And tomorrow night at 7 o'clock is the Virginia Beach Tea Party meeting
Yes,
at the Masonic Lodge on Princess Anne Road.
yes.
Their guest speaker is Gary Porter, who's the founder and executive director of the Constitution Leadership Initiative. He's going to be talking about the Constitution and how it's impacting this country right now, what's going on. So I wanted to make sure we answered that. We have some credible guests coming up too that we're not going to even tell you about right now. But they're
It would be too exciting.
Too exciting next
all at
season.
once.
That's almost like ingesting colloquial or whatever it is. What is it? What? I took it when I had COVID.
Kind of colloquial.
Clo-
Come on, Robert, help me
What
out
was
here.
it? You
Oh,
talked about
The
it.
antibodies.
Yeah, the antibodies.
Oh, monoclonal.
Monoclonal.
antibodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Colloquial.
colloquial. Well,
It's okay. He took something. He's still here, so it was the right thing.
Yeah, it worked.
that is it. And
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.